very much. Thank you very much, Professor Renu. I'm sorry, I'm just meeting you now. So I'm sorry I was bombed out in load shedding and all the things of technicalities that we have challenges with. But it was a very interesting presentation from the parts that I heard. I'm just going to check if there's anything else in the chat. Anybody got a comment? Raise a hand. Or was the presentation so amazing it just blew us away? It was very interesting. And I think Prof. Daniels and Dr. Hart and Professor Fielding, we were speaking about this yesterday, about the importance of having champions. So I think almost wanting to say we're on the right track in our thinking.
Yeah. I wonder if I may put a request to Prof. Reno, if it's possible for you to share screen again and just take us to your slide where you sort of had the 4 columns of broader impacts. It relates a lot to what Prof. Fielding also spoke about yesterday.
Absolutely. Talking about this one?
One back, I think it's just before this one.
This one?
Yes. Yes. Because yesterday was a very interesting discussion, and Prof. Fielding will maybe elaborate. He's just also currently in load shedding, you know, with this power outage in South Africa that they now announced this for 10 months ahead of us. We save every bit of battery power to be part of the colloquium. But what was interesting yesterday is that he presented sort of the cycle of how it is that research and our scholarship of engagement as faculty needs to cut across the core functions of the university. So it has to influence our teaching and learning, it has to influence our research, and it has to influence our engagement. And he presented something very interesting to say, if we say at the end of planning an intervention or doing an engagement, and we say at the end, okay, let's look at broader impacts, it sort of comes after the fact. And he suggested that broader impacts needs to be the first column, and that you must first think about how am I going to put that footprint out there and the transformation and change that's required, and then start with planning, implementation, and evaluation. And so it was just interesting how none of you met each other, you haven't seen each other's PowerPoints, and here you come with your one today to say research can be the broader impact, and you basically did put broader impacts first and say start with that thought and then let's take it from there. But let's hear what Prof. Fielding and others has to say. It was just very interesting now when I saw it was as if you are all synchronized in the virtual world today.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Professor Renu, thank you. Very interesting presentation. Kunal did an amazing summary of my presentation yesterday. I don't think I would have even gotten close to that. I think what I would like to add is that very much dependent on the discipline, I find, we need to almost ahead of time define what community engagement is. You know, for our dentists and for our education faculties, community engagement takes on a very different meaning than for the scientists. And community engagement, and that's what we discuss afterwards in our debriefing session as well, does not necessarily mean that you publish in community engagement journals only, but it's also the engagement with the community and the benefit to the community after the research. So it's much more complex than what I'm speaking as a scientist at the moment. It's much more complex than, in my mind, than what it is in an expert like yourself and Kunal, for instance. So we discussed yesterday that we need to very clearly define what community engagement is, so that we can have that discussion with our researchers, even before the point of applying for funding. but really for them to sit down and see what those community needs are from an engagement perspective, and then start the planning. And it will really take a mind shift change in some of the faculties. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of the need for infrastructure is training to understand what is community engagement, what does it look like, how do you do it and do it well, how do you partner with people in the community. I don't know what it's like there at UWC, but here on our campus, we don't always have the best track record of being good partners with communities, right? A lot of times we come in, we want them to help us with our research project or just get our research project funded, and then we don't really hold up our end of the deal when we're done. And so part of it is helping researchers understand what it means to be a good partner. I love what you said about it doesn't just mean publishing in a journal. You know, when we talk about broader impacts, I like to use things that are cultural references. And when I was a kid, I watched Wheel of Fortune all the time with my grandparents. And I always think about the fact that everybody used the same 5 letters in Val, and they figured that out. Well, here for broader impacts, the Wheel of Fortune broader impacts that I call it are, I'm going to have a graduate student or an undergraduate who works with me. I'm going to take everything I learned in my research and I'm going to put it into my classroom, which I don't think is a bad thing, but it's something that everybody should be doing. I'm going to present at a conference. I'm going to write in a paper. And those are things that are wonderful things to begin with, but they are things that the NSF thinks of as a tenure track faculty's job. You should be training students. You should be informing your teaching. You should be informing your service. You should be presenting at professional conferences, and you should be publishing. What are you doing that is beyond serving yourself? What is that thing that gets to real societal impact? And for some faculty, that's really easy to understand. And for others, we really have to bring them along. The other thing I think that's really important in the work that we're doing is broadening participation. Being more diverse, being more inclusive, being accessible for persons with disabilities. We get into this space and we're still trying to figure that out. How do we provide closed captioning? How do we look at some of these extra tools that we use? We've been thinking about Padlets and Jamboards and Google Docs, and how do we do these things that are sort of extra to Zoom meetings like this. But if they're not accessible to screen readers or other things, we're leaving people behind. We're not allowing people to participate. And those are things that when I was a graduate student, nobody trained us about that. No one talked to us about that. How do we make our things accessible? How do we bring more diverse students into our labs and other spaces? So I think training and infrastructure is key to a lot of this, and then actually holding people accountable to doing it.
Thank you. And then we have a question from an international colleague of yours, Professor Jari Weintraub. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. I hope so. The question is, Susan, great talk as always. Would you be willing to say a few more words about international research impacts, where things stand on a global level, and how you see the efforts of ARIS in the US and the University of the Western Cape contributing to the international picture? Is there an international RI community, or is it primarily a collection of individual countries doing things in relative isolation? It's a mouthful for you.
Jory does it on purpose just to mess with me. No, absolutely. He's asking a question that he knows I love to talk about. So one of the things we did last year at the height of the pandemic was try to have monthly webinars. So keeping our community engaged. And one of the webinar series we had was an international impact series. And Cornell was one of our speakers for that, talking about the impact situation in South Africa. This sounds very colloquial, but I just didn't realize we were still getting a grasp on what was happening in our country with broader impacts. And it wasn't until I went to an Impact of Science conference in the Netherlands several years ago that I realized almost every country is dealing with this. How do we show the value of our research? How do we bring research into communities and communities into research? And so since then, I've been on a mission to find everybody who's doing this work, everybody and everywhere in the world, and to learn from them. In fact, when I met Cornell for the first time, when she came to visit us at MU, all I wanted to do was sit at her feet and listen to what she was doing and what South Africa is doing, because I think that they're, in ways, you are so much further advanced than us. And I'm so excited that I get to learn from that. And the same is true if you look at the work that's happening in the Netherlands. The conversations they're having around promotion and tenure and what counts as excellence in research and including engagement, that's super exciting. When you see the research excellence framework in the UK, there's good and bad with that, and people love it or hate it, it seems. But having an institution, a national impact strategy is something that's completely foreign to us, right? Broader Impacts is really in one funding agency. We talk about it more broadly, but really it's in one place and it's not a national mandate. So yes, there's an international impact community. ARIS has a formal partnership with Research Impact Canada. They're our good and dear friends. We co-hosted our conference last year on workforce development with them. We have several international members on our advisory board. eARMA, which is one of the research development organizations. They actually, INORMS, which is an international research development organization. I was part of an international committee to look at that and to create a toolkit around crosswalking some of the different things that are happening in different countries. So yes, Jory, you asked the question that started like Pandora's box. There is an international community and they are interested in these things. And a lot of times the conversation is about what's different, but there's, I think, more similarities than there are differences.
Thank you. Anybody got a hand up that I can't see? A comment? Okay, we have a comment from Mohammed. The challenge lies in bridging the gap between the need to satisfy requirements of the corporatized higher education and keeping your job and getting promoted, whilst at the same time contributing to social enhancement, as was the role of the academy in the past. Social engagement provides the opportunity for partnerships of joint shared knowledge creation that challenges coloniality. Thanks, Mohammed.
That right there is the crux of everything. In fact, I had several conversations just yesterday about this. We have been constantly saying that the barrier to expanding public engagement and societal impact is promotion and tenure. What counts towards promotion, what counts towards US News and World Report rankings, what counts towards metrics of success are the things that people go after, right? We measure what counts, and what counts is what is valued. It's very easy to measure research, right? How many grants you have, how many dollars you have, how many expenditures you have. That's why H indexes are so popular. We can put a number on something. It's very hard to put a number on engagement, at least here on our campus. It's so decentralized in the sense that, you know, we don't run every engagement program through our office. Individual faculty run Broader Impacts all the time without using us. They reach out into the community and do community engaged scholarship without talking to us, and they can do that. It's hard for us to put to know what all that's going on campus, but then to put a hard number on that. And so there are several groups right now who are trying to figure out what are the metrics for engagement. Because if we can suggest some metrics, then people can start thinking about how to collect them. The other thing too is that there's a sense within the academy, and I like how you said that, the traditional academy, the role of the academy in the past. There's this idea that if we include engagement or IDE in promotion and tenure processes, that somehow we are watering down the academy. Instead of strengthening it and making it better, we're weakening it. And I think until we get past that mentality, we're going to have a hard time with this. I would love to know what other people think about that and suggestions for how we get around that.
Thanks, Prof. Renu. Konala said the challenge is for us to put indicators for the assessment of engagement and to have standardized metrics to prove the BI of the faculty member, schools, and then the university at large. And I think this was our theme of day one when we spoke about the transformative agenda and how the institutional culture has to change and how the academic mindset has to change, as you said, that it's perceived as strengthening rather than watering it down and diluting it, but it is about. And I think we used the example of a couple of years ago at UWC, it was research was the main driver for academic promotions, and everybody wanted the research. And Professor Levac came on board, and people were not promoted if you didn't do teaching, because teaching is not the stepchild to research. You need to do teaching and you need to do research. So there is a sense that you need to do community engagement as well at that same level. And I think that, and we know that the process is a slow one in higher ed. Just saying.
Fielding, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Kunal. Professor Renu, you are so correct in what you're saying. And what complicates it even further in South Africa is that a very large portion of our government subsidies linked to publications and outputs. Only recently, government has also included creative outputs, fortunately. But you know, even those type of drivers are complicating the process even more. And it complicates the discussion even more with researchers. So I think the entire system almost needs a rethink. And fortunately, we discussed this yesterday as well, fortunately, one of our main funders is looking at this. But it's going to be a slow process, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yes, Prof. Fielding, I wonder if you can maybe just recap, because I know you've yesterday, you know, NRF, which Prof. Reno, that's the same than the NSF in the States. But I know Prof. Fielding has been part of some of the working groups on how the NRF in South Africa is now extending and re-looking at bringing in broader impacts, much more than when you and I met in 2019 about what was then available. So I wonder, Prof. Fielding, if you just want to just give sort of just a brief context, quick, on what has been the process sort of the last couple of months that all of you and working committees have been doing to sort of make policy and the legislative framework of the NRF aligned more to what broader impacts are in sustainable development goals and country development drives.
Kunal, I think we just have Professor Levac's hand. Can we just take that first, and then I'll give a very brief summary?
Thanks, Bro.
Maybe just to mention that it's interesting the timing that the NRF is looking at this. From a learning and teaching perspective, I am a member of the USAF, which is our forum for the vice chancellors in South Africa of the public higher education institutions. And I'm a member of the Teaching and Learning Strategy Group. And at the USAF Higher Education Conference at the beginning of October, the theme of this year's conference was the Engaged University. And I chaired the session on community engagement. And what came out very, very clear, and they're actually sharing those views now with the system, is that we will have to look at the way in which we also, through funding increments, recognize that especially if we want to have an integrated scholarship of engagement, that link to funding, because currently the funding would in a sense not be expressed for community engagement. It would be if community engagement is either linked to a or incorporated in our curricula, in some of our modules, then of course you will get the subsidy from the state that you've earned. Then of course the other part would be if you do research, which has a community impact, but it's still the research output that gets subsidized. So there's a conversation happening in South Africa in the higher education space at the moment. And I'm hoping from the Teaching and Learning Strategy Group, I've put it on the list of priority 2022 for yourself, and we will be definitely looking into making sure that we can make that link much more express so that it can lead right through to the funding instruments as well.
Thanks, Prof. Levak. Prof. Fielding, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks, Prof.
Fielding has just text to say he's just trying to reconnect because he's between different logins when power dips and power comes back in. So maybe we can just take a few more comments and questions, and then he will just give the briefing. He just sent me a WhatsApp now to say you'll reconnect just now.
So I have a question for the group today that kind of relates to what Professor Levak just said. Some of the conversations have been around funding. So with broader impacts, it gets put into the entire budget, the whole research budget. So you have to budget money for the research, you have to budget money for the broader impacts, all from the same pot. And it's been suggested that we should have a separate pool of money for broader impacts. And along with that, it's also been suggested that why don't we let the researchers focus on the research, and why don't we have broader impacts practitioners or engagement practitioners who are applying for those pots of money, and they're actually doing the broader impacts part. And I wonder what you all think about separating out funding for engagement from research, and also separating out who's responsible for doing it.
Now there's lots of silence.
Maybe
So good at coming up with models, so she will suggest.
Yeah, sorry, Cornell. Advantages, of course, of having a dedicated fund and separating that. But I'm wondering if a combination wouldn't be possible, in the sense that if you have for research, for broader or societal impact, then maybe that fund becomes where the researchers can put proposals to. That in that sense, you get both of the best of both worlds, in the sense that researchers will be doing the research, but they can have access to funds from an institution if it is dedicated funds. So in our system anyway, that would mean there would be subsidy that will be gained. So there will be money coming back into the institution. But from the perspective of the researcher, it's not just for their own benefit, because it has to then have a broad impact, or at least show, according to your metrics, what societal impact that research would be. And that does not mean that you say the practitioners would then do something else, but I'm seeing the practitioners actually working with the researchers and becoming part of that research team and being the link to the communities that you're working in. So, so ultimately, I don't think it matters really where money is sitting. It's going to be what you do with that funding.
Thanks, Prof. Levak. Cornell, has Prof. Fielding come back into the group?
Not yet. I don't see him in yet, unless he's logged in with a different device. But I've also indicated now, I was just typing to indicate Prof. Levak has also at UWC started several years ago Community Engagement Awards. And so it's for group projects, it's for individuals, etc. With that comes a little bit of finance award, a grant award too, to assist all of us on campus to advance our scholarship of engagement in relation to broader impacts. But it is, again, also not yet something that's separated through our NRF. Maybe when Prof. Fielding comes back in or towards the end of today's session, he can expand on what is currently being discussed with the NRF, because I know one of the things that our SARCHI chairs has done with him is to say that there has to be either specified funding or the grant funding has to be increased, because there is just not enough funding to go around for the research project itself and to then do those equitable partnerships. And I know some of the deans also, when they presented the day before yesterday, indicated how they do all these projects, but how a lot of their projects are held back because there isn't specific money to reach communities. And now it became even more problematic during COVID, when they couldn't travel with the students, for example, when they do work placement or community service. They used to use that transport fees, for example, to then also get to their broader impacts work.
I think you both hit on things that I think are really important. The first is there's never enough money. There is never enough money to do all the things that we promise. And what I always tell people is, if we look at our budget like this, more than half of that comes out off the top here for us, for the indirect and the facility fees. And then we take out money for graduate students, and we take out money for research. And then there's like a little sliver of light for the engagement part. And then there's no money left, and we still want to do, you know, impact assessment and evaluation. So the money is a key part of that. The second thing is what Professor Levesque said, which I think is really important. I am adamantly against separating out the engagement from the research, because I feel like that lets researchers off the hook. I feel like that separates the research, which is a key component. We want people to be involved in that. And I think it has to be a partnership. I think you have to bring on practitioners who can help you, partners who can help you. But I think when we separate those things out, then we're defeating what it is we're trying to do in the first place. So I have very strong feelings about that. But every time somebody brings it up, I think I could be persuaded. Let's see what people think about that.
Thank you. Prof. Fielding
Prof.
has.
Levesque, I wonder if Prof. Levesque maybe just wants to, I could see on the camera how she nodded her head, because she's, I know even at the academic week a while ago, how she indicated she's also completely against the separation. It sounds like listening to two twin sisters today.
That's why I was shaking my head. I think it's so nice to hear someone else use the same thing to me that I'm normally saying. I absolutely agree with you. If I think of when I came to UWC, I was amazed when I looked at my budget that was already assigned to me, that, for example, for the Center for the Community Engagement Unit, there was only 80,000. How can this be? How can a big chunk of money go elsewhere? Also posts quite unevenly, and I couldn't understand that one can operate in front of universities, so I just give 80,000 Rand. And yet we do benefit from the reputationally from the kind of work that's facilitated through the CEU. And so what we've managed to do in the interim is actually to leverage our other grants. And I think that is one thing that one mustn't forget. That, for example, if we have in South Africa University Capacity Development Grant, so I always made sure that even in the learning and teaching part, that we infuse the community engagement in there, so that we could have special funding through that grant to the community engagement units, so that they can broaden the work or the scope of work. So I do think that there's actually possibilities, and maybe it's something we should talk offline, that if we then partner internationally and have a specific, we identify specific grants that we go for collaborative projects, because I believe that we have a story to tell at UWC, but you've also got your story to tell from Missouri. So I'm just putting it out there. I've got a book proposal proposal in mind, but we'll chat offline about that. And it's the leveraging of the partnerships, but also the leveraging of the funding opportunities that do exist. And then of course it will be then strengthened in the kind of intellectual engagement that we bring to it as well.
Thanks very much, Prof. Levak. Do you think that we can conclude the session now with Prof. Fielding touching base with Prof. Renu at a different point?
Yes,
thanks very much. Prof. Renu, I would like to say thanks very much. It was very enlightening, very thought-provoking. Many questions and many models that you provided us. I especially like the connector, and I know Prof. Levak liked the connector concept as well, because and the reaching in and the reaching out. That I think was very, very it was a nice easy point to phrase to catch. And I think that the hallmarks of the successful impact office, I think that at UWC we'll take heed to that. We're doing it, and we will go on from strength to strength, and using your inputs and your insights will guide us a far way. And in conclusion, thanks for your invite to join ADIS and for your invitation to the 2022 summit. Thank you so much. And everybody, we will be breaking for virtual tea. And it's now 3:01. What time would we come back for our virtual session?
Can we just do a 5-minute, Anita, so that we try and stick to our time?
Perfect. Then we'll be back at 3:06. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy tea.